Hello, welcome back. Let's read some more slavery in the Roman Empire, but let's close my door. I have a big pain in my back. Like here. So I need to lay down in my bed, but you can read this. So I will go to my bed. Oh, my back. I have to lay down. So let's read this.
Toggle the table of contents. Slavery in ancient Rome. Roman mosaic from Dugger, Tunisia, 2nd century AD. The two slaves carrying wine jars wear typical slave clothing and an amulet against fever lie on a necklace. The slave boy to the left carries water and towels, and the one on the right a bowl and a basket of flowers. 1. Slavery in ancient Rome played an important role in society and the economy. Besides manual labor, slaves performed many domestic services and might be employed at highly skilled jobs and professions. Accountants and physicians were often slaves. Slaves of Greek origin in particular might be highly educated. Unskilled slaves, or those sentenced to slavery as punishment, worked on farms, in mines, and at mills. Slaves were considered property under Roman law and had no legal personhood. Most slaves would never be freed. Unlike Roman citizens, they could be subjected to corporal punishment, sexual exploitation. Prostitutes were often slaves, torture and summary execution. Over time, however, slaves gained increased legal protection, including the right to file complaints against their masters. One major source of slaves had been Roman military expansion during the Republic. The use of former enemy soldiers as slaves led perhaps inevitably to a series of mass armed rebellions, the Servile Wars, the last of which was led by Spartacus. During the Pax Romana of the early Roman Empire, 1st-2nd centuries AD, the emphasis was placed on maintaining stability, and the lack of new territorial conquests dried up this supply line of human trafficking. To maintain an enslaved workforce, increased legal restrictions on freeing slaves were put into place. Escaped slaves would be hunted down and returned, often for a reward. There were also many cases of poor people selling their children to richer neighbors as slaves in times of hardship. 2. Origins. In his Institutions, 161 AD, the Roman jurist Gaius wrote that sad smiley slavery is the state that is recognized by the ius gentium, in which someone is subject to the dominion of another person contrary to nature. Gaius, Institutions 1.3.2, 3. The 1st century BC Greek historian Dionysius of Halicarnassus indicates that the Roman institution of slavery began with the legendary founder Romulus, giving Roman fathers the right to sell their own children into slavery, and kept growing with the expansion of the Roman state. Slave ownership was most widespread throughout the Roman citizenry from the Second Punic War, 218-201 BC, to the 40th century AD. The Greek geographer Strabo, 1st century AD, records how an enormous slave trade resulted from the collapse of the Seleucid Empire, 163 BC. 4. The 12 Tables, Rome's oldest legal code, has brief references to slavery, indicating that the institution was of long standing. In the tripartite division of law by the jurist Ulpian, 2nd century AD, slavery was an aspect of the ius gentium, the customary international law held in common among all peoples, gens. The law of nations was neither considered natural law, thought to exist in nature and govern animals as well as humans, nor civil law, belonging to the emerging bodies of laws specific to a people in Western societies. 5. All human beings are born free, liberi, under natural law, but slavery was held to be a practice common to all nations, who might then have specific civil laws pertaining to slaves. 5. In ancient warfare the victor had the right under the ius gentium to enslave a defeated population. However, if a settlement had been reached through diplomatic negotiations or formal surrender, the people were by custom to be spared violence and enslavement. The ius gentium was not a legal code. 6. And any force it had depended on reasoned compliance with standards of international conduct. 7. Vernae, singular verna, were slaves born within a household, familia, or on a family farm or agricultural estate, villa. There was a stronger social obligation to care for vernae, whose epitaphs sometimes identify them as such, and at times they would have been the children of free males of the household. 8. 9. The general Latin word for slave was servus. Slavery and warfare. Throughout the Roman period, many slaves for the Roman market were acquired through warfare. Many captives were either brought back as war booty or sold to traders. 10. And ancient sources cite anywhere from hundreds to tens of thousands of such slaves captured in each war. 11. 12. These wars included every major war of conquest from the monarchical period to the imperial period, as well as the social and Samnite wars. 13. The prisoners taken or retaken after the 3 Roman servile wars, 135, 132, 104, 173, 71 BC, respectively, also contributed to the slave supply. 14. While warfare during the Republic provided the largest figures for captives. 15. Warfare continued to produce slaves for Rome throughout the imperial period. 16. Piracy has a long history of adding to the slave trade. 17. And the period of the Roman Republic was no different. Piracy was particularly lucrative in Cilicia, where pirates operated with impunity from a number of strongholds. Pompey was credited with effectively eradicating piracy from the Mediterranean in 67 BC. 18. Although large-scale piracy was curbed under Pompey and controlled under the Roman Empire, it remained a steady institution, and kidnapping through piracy continued to contribute to the Roman slave supply. Augustine lamented the wide-scale practice of kidnapping in North Africa in the early 5th century AD. 19. Trade and economy. 4th century sarcophagus relief of Valerius Petronianus, with his slave-holding writing tablets during the period of Roman imperial expansion. The increase in wealth amongst the Roman elite and the substantial growth of slavery transformed the economy. 20. Although the economy was dependent on slavery, Rome was not the most slave-dependent culture in history. Among the Spartans, for instance, the slave class of Helots outnumbered the free by about 7 to 1, according to Herodotus. 21. In any case, the overall role of slavery in Roman economy is a discussed issue among scholars. 22, 23, 24. Delos in the eastern Mediterranean was made a free port in 166 BC and became one of the main market venues for slaves. Multitudes of slaves who found their way to Italy were purchased by wealthy landowners in need of large numbers of slaves to labor on their estates. Historian Keith Hopkins noted that it was land investment and agricultural production which generated great wealth in Italy, and considered that Rome's military conquests and the subsequent introduction of vast wealth and slaves into Italy had effects comparable to widespread and rapid technological innovations. 4. Augustus imposed a 2% tax on the sale of slaves, estimated to generate annual revenues of about 5 million sesterces, a figure that indicates some 250,000 sales. 25. The tax was increased to 4% by 43 AD. 26. Slave markets seem to have existed in every city of the empire, but outside Rome the major center was Ephesus. 25. Demography. Estimates for the prevalence of slavery in the Roman Empire vary. Estimates of the percentage of the population of Italy who were slaves range upwards of 1 to 2 million slaves in Italy by the end of the 1st century BC, about 20% to 30% of Italy's population. 27, 28, 29, 30. For the empire as a whole during the period 260–425 AD, according to a study by Kyle Harper. Demography. Captives in Rome, a 19th century painting by Charles W. Bartlett. New slaves were primarily acquired by wholesale landowners in need of large numbers of slaves to labor on their estates. Historian Keith Hopkins noted that it was land investment and agricultural production which generated great wealth in Italy, and considered that Rome's military conquests and the subsequent introduction of vast wealth and slaves into Italy had effects comparable to widespread and rapid technological innovations. 4. Augustus imposed a 2% tax on the sale of slaves, estimated to generate annual revenues of about 5 million sesterces, a figure that indicates some 250,000 sales. 25. The tax was increased to 4% by 43 AD. 26. Slave markets seem to have existed in every city of the empire, but outside Rome the major center was Ephesus. 25. Demography. Estimates for the prevalence of slavery in the Roman Empire vary. Estimates of the percentage of the population of Italy who were slaves range upwards of 1 to 2 million slaves in Italy by the end of the 1st century BC, about 20% to 30% of Italy's population. 27, 28, 29, 30. For the empire as a whole during the period 260–425 AD, according to a study by Kyle Harper, the slave population has been estimated at just under 5 million, representing 10–15% of the total population of 50–60 million inhabitants. An estimated 49% of all slaves were owned by the elite, who made up less than 1.5% of the empire's population. About half of all slaves worked in the countryside, where they were a small percentage of the population except on some large agricultural, especially imperial, estates. The remainder of the other half were a significant percentage, 25% or more, in towns and cities as domestics and workers in commercial enterprises and manufacturers. 31. Roman slavery was not based on ideas of race. 32. 33. Slaves were drawn from all over Europe and the Mediterranean, including Gaul, Hispania, North Africa, Syria, Germany, Britannia, the Balkans, Greece, etc. Those from outside of Europe were predominantly of Greek descent, while Jews never fully assimilated into Roman society, remaining an identifiable minority. 34. The slaves, especially the foreigners, had higher mortality rates and lower birth rates than natives and were sometimes even subjected to mass expulsions. 34. The average recorded age at death for the slaves of the city of Rome was extraordinarily low, 17.5 years, 17.24 males, 17.94 females, 35. By comparison, life expectancy at birth for the population as a whole was in the mid-20s. 36. Estimated distribution of citizenship in the Roman Empire, middle of the 1st century AD, 28. 37. Region citizens, percent, non-citizen residents, percent, slaves, percent, Rome 551530, Italy 70525, Spain and Gaul 107020, other Western provinces 38017, Greece and Asia Minor 37027, North African provinces 27028, other Eastern provinces 18019. Auctions and sales. Captives in Rome, a 19th century painting by Charles W. Bartlett. New slaves were primarily acquired by wholesale dealers who followed the Roman armies. 38. Many people who bought slaves wanted strong slaves, mostly men. 39. Child slaves cost less than adults. 40. Although other sources state their price as higher. 41. Julius Caesar once sold the entire population of a conquered region in Gaul, no fewer than 53,000 people, to slave dealers on Thespert. 42. Within the empire, slaves were sold at public auction or sometimes in shops, or by private sale in the case of more valuable slaves. Slave dealing was overseen by the Roman fiscal officials called quaestors. Sometimes slaves stood on revolving stands, and around each slave for sale hung a type of plaque describing their origin, health, character, intelligence, education, and other information pertinent to purchasers. Prices varied with age and quality, with the most valuable slaves fetching high prices. Because purchasers wanted to make sure that slaves they were buying were healthy, the slaves were usually presented naked. The dealer was required to take a slave back within 6 months if the slave had defects that were not manifest at the sale, or make good the buyer's loss. 43. Slaves to be sold with no guarantee were made to wear a cap at the auction. Debt slavery. Necum was a debt bondage contract in the early Roman Republic. Within the Roman legal system, it was a form of mancipatio. Though the terms of the contract would vary, essentially a free man pledged himself as a bond slave, nexus, as surety for a loan. He might also hand over his son as collateral. Although the bondsman could expect to face humiliation and some abuse, as a legal citizen he was supposed to be exempt from corporal punishment. Necum was abolished by the Lex Poetelia Pauperia in 326 BC, in part to prevent abuses to the physical integrity of citizens who had fallen into debt bondage. Roman historians illuminated the abolition of Necum with a traditional story that varied in its particulars. Basically, a nexus who was a handsome but upstanding youth suffered sexual harassment by the holder of debt. In one version, the youth had gone into debt to pay for his father's funeral, in others, he had been handed over by his father. In all versions, he is presented as a model of virtue. Historical or not, the cautionary tale highlighted the incongruities of subjecting one free citizen to another's use, and the legal response was aimed at establishing the citizen's right to liberty, libertas, as distinguished from the slave or social outcast, infamis. 44. Cicero considered the abolition of Necum primarily a political maneuver to appease the common people. Plebs. The law was passed during the conflict of the orders, when plebeians were struggling to establish the rights in relation to the hereditary privileges of the patricians. Although Necum was abolished as a way to secure a loan, debt bondage might still result after a debtor defaulted. 45. Types of work. Slaves worked in a wide range of occupations that can be roughly divided into 5 categories: household or domestic, imperial or public, urban crafts and services, agriculture, and mining. 46. Mosaic depicting 2 female slaves, ancilli, attending their mistress' epitaphs record at least 55 different jobs a household Slav might have, 46, including barber, butler, cook, hairdresser, handmaid, ancilla,